Hello, my name's Levi, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read last month, as well as the books that I'm planning to read next month. Hopefully. Keywords on hopefully. I basically just saw other people do videos like this and decided I would just talk about the books that I'm interested in reading, and then as well as the ones that I read last month, and just kind of keep this as like a little, almost like journal entry describing everything that I've read and everything I want to read so I can kind of keep track of things. Today is March 2nd, is actually also my birthday, and so today I went out and bought a bunch of these books. I shouldn't say a bunch, but a couple of these books that I plan on reading this upcoming month are ones that I bought today, so that's pretty exciting. Also, on a side note, my fiance made me this print, hopefully you guys can see that well, of two river otters. You can hear my cat outside, and it's absolutely beautiful. I'm gonna have to hang this up somewhere, but I'm not sure where yet. I love river otters, so that's why she did it. Hopefully that the camera picks it up well. But other than that, let's just get into the books. So starting off the month, I run a book club with a couple of my friends. And this month, we actually read, at the start of the month, we finished Red Rising by Pierce Brown. So this was a reread for me. I have read this book before, so this wasn't entirely new, and I knew it was gonna happen, but I actually appreciated this book a lot more on a reread, I would say, than I did on the first read. So that was cool, it was very enjoyable. And I ended up rating this book 5 stars once again, which is why I read it last year and I rated it 5 stars, and I also am rating it 5 stars again this year. So definitely a really great book to read if you like sci-fi, fantasy type stuff. If you like the Hunger Games, this first book draws a lot of parallels to that type of like battle royale style. But I do think that the rest of the series kind of diverts from that a bit. But overall, the series is great. It's very action-packed. There's some great moments, some great characters. If you want an action-packed space adventure, I would say this is a great one to read. The series in general. I've only read the first trilogy, but either way, the first trilogy is brilliant. So definitely should check it out. And sticking with that same avenue, I don't remember the timing of everything, but we continued the series with the book club and ended up also finishing Golden Sun, which I also gave 5 stars. This book it just levels up from the last book. If you've read those two books, you know what I'm talking about. We go away from the Hunger Games aspect, we go to more of a space opera type scene, and it is just awesome. There are so many scenes that just stick out in my head from this book that I think about all the time. And I have since I read it the first time last year. Would highly recommend this series as a whole, but that's about all I'm gonna say because I feel like I'm beating a dead horse. If you don't know about Red Rising, what are you doing? Because this is a very well-known book series, and if you haven't read it, you should definitely read it. If you even are like remotely interested. And then, so I think actually before I finished Golden Sun for the book club, because that took us about 2 weeks to read, I had read on my own and read Malice by John Gwynne. This was my first read of John Gwynne. This is it's basically like Norse mythology meets a fantasy world. Like, it's very inspired by Norse mythology. It was really enjoyable. I did find certain parts at the beginning and the middle a little bit slow, and there's definitely certain POVs in this book that I favored more than others. But I really enjoyed this book, and I think it led to something that's going to be really great in the upcoming books. For this book, I also gave it 5 stars. I promise not all the books I read last month I gave 5 stars, but I am pretty liberal when it comes to giving out 5 stars on books. If I really enjoy them and they have some type of emotional impact to me, I'm generally probably going to give it 5 stars unless there's something that I really dislike about it. And I never disliked reading this book. Like I said, there was some slow parts, but it wasn't like painfully slow to the point where I wanted to put the book down. It was just like, I'm just growing with the characters a little bit in these moments, and I appreciated that. I would recommend this book if you want to read some fantasy that's maybe like mythologically based, and you want kind of a multi-POV story where you're going through these different kingdoms, and there's some politics, there's some warring, there's also some fantastical elements to it. Overall, it was a really great read, and I'm excited to read more of John Gwynne coming up. Also, this was a lot of the books that I read this last coming month were pretty chunky. I shouldn't say that they weren't really chunky in fantasy standards, but they were bigger books than your average novel. The next book that I read and finished for the month was Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. And yeah, I just absolutely love these UK covers. I have Mistborn Era 1 as well as Elantris and Warbreaker in these cover styles. And I've read all those books of Sanderson. This is my 5th Sanderson read, and I enjoyed this one, but I think the magic system in this one was really cool. But I think out of Elantris, Mistborn Era 1, and this one, it was actually my least favorite read that I read thus far for Sanderson. It was pretty close to Elantris. I didn't dislike this book, but I think I preferred the story of Elantris and the POVs a little bit more than this book. I think the magic system of this book is a lot cooler than Elantris's, but either way, I think though I just preferred Elantris in general probably a little bit more than this book, but this was still an enjoyable read. I ended up rating this book a 4.4, which is the lowest, like I said, out of all the Sanderson books, but would still highly recommend it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting with this book. I think you could, but I mean, I think if you want to pick up Sanderson, just go with Mistborn Era 1. I don't really think I need to give you a spiel on why you should read Brandon Sanderson. If you're watching this video, you probably have already heard about him. Same thing with Red Rising. But if you like magic systems that are very structured and they're very hard magic systems, just read Sanderson. He's very good at those systems. And lastly, the last book that I finished last month was a book that actually me and my fiance have been reading for months now. We've been listening to it on audio, and while we've been running, and we've been kind of like, we took a long break from listening, so just took us a while to get through, and the story kind of is choppy in my memory a little bit, but overall I enjoyed it, and that was The Outsider by Stephen King. This was my eighth book that I've read from Stephen King, who eventually I would like to read all of his books because I really enjoy his writing and the horror genre in general, at least from what I've read of his. I haven't read really anything outside of Stephen King when it comes to horror, but I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was one of Stephen King's more modern books that really hit, and that's what I've kind of heard the general consensus is. And it was really interesting. It's like basically, I won't go into too much detail about the book to give spoilers, but we have this violent crime that happens, and we have an investigator who's investigating this violent crime, and things just aren't adding up. And there's some supernatural element to it, and there's also a TV show on HBO. I haven't watched the TV show, but I have a friend who has, and he said it was pretty good, so maybe I'll check that out as well. Overall though, this is my least favorite read of the month, I would say. My least favorite book that I finished, mostly because it was just, like I said, a very choppy reading experience for me because we just didn't really consistently listen to it. I gave this book 4 stars. I think I'm generally a pretty high rater when it comes to books. I don't rate things bad a lot of times, and a lot of times because I just won't finish books if I don't enjoy them. And to be honest, most of the times I do. There's only been one book I haven't finished in the last year, and that was not even because I didn't necessarily enjoy it. It was just because I wanted to read other things at the time. So really, most stories I enjoy a decent bit, it seems like, and I'm pretty liberal when it comes to rating stories. So now I'm kind of segue into the books that I'm currently reading, because those are kind of bleeding in between the books that I read last month and the books that I will read this month. I'm planning to finish all these books in the coming month. And yeah, so it's going to be a bit of a switch up comparatively to what last month was. Obviously, last month we had a lot of sci-fi fantasy style stuff, and there's going to be some of that in this next coming month, but I really wanted to focus in a little bit more on some other types of genres and read some other different things and get outside of my comfort zone a bit, and so that's what a lot of this next month is going to be focused on. And yeah, I'm excited to get into it. So let's go over the books that I'm reading currently. So following up with the book club, obviously I said we finished Red Rising and Golden Sun last month, so it made sense that we would be reading Morningstar this month. We were about a week into it. We expect this book to take us about 3 weeks to read, so I'll finish this somewhere near the end of March, and yeah, like I said, I've already read this one, so it's a reread, but I'm rereading it with some of my friends who I think are really enjoying it, so that's making it a very fun experience. And I'm picking up on a lot of things in a second read that I didn't pick up on the first read, and it's also just I think it's gonna bleed very well into starting Iron Gold, which I plan to start. I think the book club, we're just gonna keep going with Red Rising. We may take a break after this trilogy and read like a one-off book or something, but I think eventually we're just gonna keep going with this series, so I'm excited to get to the further books that I haven't read in the series. But yeah, so currently reading this, we'll finish this month. I expect this to be another 5-star read. I gave it 5 stars the last time. Originally in the first read through, it was actually my favorite book in the trilogy, but I think on this read through, Golden Sun was really, really good. I mean, I enjoyed that one last time too, but we'll see if this one holds up or if it stays the favorite, or if it gets dethroned by Golden Sun. Now we get kind of into more of the diversion from fantasy and sci-fi. So currently I'm about 100 or 150 pages or so into Moby Dick. And wow. So first off, this book is brilliant. Like I said, I'm only 150 pages in. I think I'm like maybe a third of the way through, and I am just absolutely captivated by it. It makes me feel like I'm out at the ocean. I have this longing to go to the sea and go on a whaling expedition, even though I think it would probably be like absolutely miserable. Just picking this book up in general has really inspired me to kind of branch out from sci-fi and fantasy. Like, obviously I've read some other genres of books before, but I really want to read more classics. So you're going to see some more of those in this upcoming, like the to be read next month. And yeah, so this book will definitely be finished this month. I don't know how I'm going to rate it exactly, but I'm enjoying it a lot. So I think it's probably going to be rated very highly thus far, if I had to guess. I will say though that currently I'm in a chapter called Cetology or something like that. And it is just all about whale facts. It's interesting, I guess. It's not my favorite chapter, but it is interesting how the style of the writing just seems to shift so much in this book. And there's just so many references to this book in different avenues that I'm picking up on in my everyday life as I'm reading it. It's just incredible seeing like how much influence a book like this can have. So that's basically all I have to say about it right now. If you guys have read Moby Dick, let me know what you think about it, because it's really exciting to me. But yeah, so let's move on to the books that I'm going to read this month. So I forgot about a book that I'm listening to on Audible, and I'll put a picture of it right here, but I'm about halfway through, I think, of the last arc 4 of Mother of Learning. If you don't know about Mother of Learning, it's a little bit more niche than I would say some of these works that I've been talking about thus far is, but it's a progression fantasy where we have a character that's stuck in a time loop, essentially, and has to keep repeating the same 1 month over and over and over again to try to get certain results. I won't go to too many details. I'm trying to keep things as general as possible and not spoiling any of these books in case you guys want to read them, but that one's really great. I have a friend that just picked it up as well, and I really highly recommend it. I've enjoyed every book thus far, and I think this 4th arc will hopefully be a very good ending to the series. So that's about all I wanted to say about that, but that will also be finished in this upcoming month. Sticking on the topic of Audible, after I finish that Mother of Learning arc 4, I plan on listening to The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. I can't believe I just had to look at the book to remember his name for a second there. I blanked on it. And that's absolutely criminal because Joe Abercrombie, the first 2 books of the First Law trilogy have been absolutely brilliant. I gave both of them 5 stars and I loved both of them. I call him my favorite fantasy author currently. So it's really like crazy that I haven't gotten to this book yet. Yeah, so we're gonna make time to listen to that this month. I don't know, it's a pretty long book. I don't know if I'll necessarily be listening to the entire thing in this month. I have a feeling that it's probably gonna end up being an experience where I'm listening to it some and reading this copy as well some, because I'm probably just gonna get really invested. The first 2 books, like I said, were just absolutely brilliant. It's a very dark series if you don't know anything about it. Once again, though, I will say this is a pretty well-known series, so there's a decent chance that you've heard about it, but if you haven't, it's a grimdark series, which means it's a lot of our characters are very morally ambiguous and they make bad decisions sometimes, but it's also very human, and how Joe Abercrombie writes his characters are just absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so I would highly recommend reading this if you haven't, and I'm very excited to get into this in the upcoming month. All right, so changing course a little bit. All those books obviously were fiction books and novels. I have one nonfiction book that I am going to be reading next month that I decided I would throw in here, and that is going to be Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. I don't really know how you say that. It's a very well-known book about a Silicon Valley startup from what I've heard, and it's very adjacent to what I do because I work in tech. And it's essentially just about a female CEO tech founder that has this big company that gets valued at billions of dollars and that eventually gets defrauded in some way. And that's about all I know. I heard that this book reads like a crime novel or a thriller though, so that sounds really interesting. And I just generally wanted to read a bit more nonfiction here and there at least and sparse some in. So going forward, I'm probably going to try to pick one nonfiction book. This is a pretty short book, but I'm going to try to pick one in general just to read throughout the month. And this will probably be read like at the same time as a lot of these books. I'll probably just keep this one ongoing and just read a little bit here and there as I'm interested in it. But yeah, so hoping to finish this one, and that is my one nonfiction book for the next month. All right, so here we get to a little bit more of like, I guess, classics, I would say. But we have a couple little light books that I plan on reading after Moby Dick, because Moby Dick it's not a huge book, but it's not the easiest reading experience either. I would say it's a very readable book comparatively to other books that I've read with that less modern English. Like, it wouldn't necessarily be classic English. I would say less modern, but it's still pretty readable in certain chapters, and then certain chapters are pretty difficult to get through. Another book that I'm excited to get to next month is The Stranger by Albert Camus. I believe it's Camus. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Let me know in the comments if you know otherwise. But yeah, I really don't know much about this book. I know it has like a ton of reviews. It's a very popular book, and I know it's like generally about a dude getting caught up in some type of murder, but I don't know too much more than that. I know that people praise Camus for his writing, so I'm very excited to get a taste of what he writes about. And yeah, a lot of these books that I picked up today were classics that were just different authors that I haven't read before. Because I want to try to read some of the great authors and understand why they're great. And I think Abercrombie is one that I really want to learn more about. This is a pretty short book, so I don't think this will take me long to read, but I'm very excited to read it nonetheless. In a similar idea, another author that I wanted to pick up and read was William Faulkner. So I picked up a copy of As I Lay Dying, and it's going to be on my TBR for this upcoming month. I really don't know much about Faulkner. I know he's an American author from the South, I believe. And I think that this novel is loosely about like a family in Mississippi, and there's a mother that has died and they're journeying somewhere to bury her, from what I understand, or from what I read on the back at least. That's about all I know. I know people that really enjoyed this book. I have some people that I know like pretty close to me that very enjoyed this book. I'm really excited to just try this one out in general and see what I think about it. Maybe I'll make a follow-up video on some of these more classic books. And just let you guys know my general thoughts, or maybe that'll be in next month's video, who knows. I also should know that these are not in any particular order, so like who knows when I'll get to this. I could pick this one up tomorrow, I could pick this one up at the end of the month, so I don't know exactly when I'll be reading all these, or even if I'll stick to this as strictly as I plan to. I may get diverted in some degrees, but these are the books that I want to get to this month, so I'm leaving them out in a stack near me as a daily reminder that these are the books that I want to read, so hopefully I will read them. All right, we have 2 more books. So this next book is a little different than a bunch of the other books that I mentioned, because I don't know if I'm actually going to be reading this entire book. I may, we'll see, but there's a specific part of this book that I want to read. And so this is just a copy of, it's called The Dialogue of Socrates by Plato. And it's a copy of some, let's see, it says some fascinating dialogues written by Plato about Socrates. Like what happened with Socrates, I think, is what he details in this book, which I don't really know too much about. But the specific dialogue that I wanted to read was Apology, because I heard that it's like Socrates' apology to his society. And I don't know, it just sounds like writing, from what I understand, he wrote this letter or something in prison when he was being jailed and about to be executed for heresy, and he's apologizing to his country. And I don't know, it sounds like a very interesting read. I want to read more historical type stuff and definitely get a feel for like I said, some of the greats. And I think that things like Greek and Roman history, like a lot of these like philosophers, they have a lot of influence on a lot of the books that I read and a lot of references to these type of things. So I think over time I just want to read more of this and mix it in my day-to-day. I don't know if I'm going to be reading this whole book this month, but I do want to read specifically Apology this month. So I don't think it's too long, but I'm excited to read that at some point in the month. And then I have my last book. So this one is actually going to be a buddy read that I'm doing with a friend of mine. We kind of, every couple of months, we pick a book and we just read it together. We don't really have a pace. We just kind of read it and then talk about it at the end. And yeah, I always enjoy doing it. And the book that we picked that we both want to read coming up is Hyperion. I also just love this cover. I have a little bit of damage on the cover, but just a super cool like copy. Very, very vintage looking, I guess would be the word. Either way, I know very little about this book. I know that it's considered a very great work of science fiction, and that this dude's in it, and he's like called like the Shrike or something like that, I think. But that's about all I know. I don't really know what the idea behind the book is. I'm going into it pretty much completely blind. The picture here on the front is about the only thing that I have familiarity with this book, but I've heard good things, and like I said, I'm excited to read it. I'm also excited to have someone to talk about with it as we read through it. And yeah, I do want to get into more science fiction stuff. It's just that like I find some science fiction stuff can be incredibly dry, and especially like when you get to the more classic stuff. And I'm hoping this is not the case. I think Dan Simmons is still writing books or has been publishing books recently, so I don't think it will be the case. But either way, excited to read it and let you guys know maybe eventually what I think about it. So these are all the books that I plan to read in the upcoming month. Hopefully I get to all of them. Thank you guys for watching if you made it this far. And if you did, if you wouldn't mind subscribing or liking the video or doing any of that type of stuff that everyone asks you to do whenever you're on YouTube, it's appreciated. But yeah, either way, you guys have a great rest of your day and thank you. Bye-bye.